First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It is my immense pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of the Dunhuang Foundation. I am Julia Grimes, the Deputy Director. We know many of you have navigated time zone and connectivity issues to join us today, and for that we are most grateful. It's my great honor today to introduce our speaker, Sam van Schaik. Sam van Schaik is head of the Endangered Archives Programme at the British Library, having previously worked for the International Dunhuang Project. His main area of research is early Tibetan Buddhism. His publications include the books Tibet, A History, Tibetan Zen, and recently, last year, Buddhist Magic. Sam's topic this afternoon will be Sino-Tibetan Astrology and Divination at Dunhuang. Without further ado, please join me now in welcoming him.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Julia, for that nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks to the Dunhuang Foundation for inviting me to speak on this subject, which I find fascinating, and I hope I will be able to communicate some of that in this talk. So let me just share my presentation straight away. So the title, Sino-Tibetan Astrology and Divination at Dunhuang. And I will just begin by saying a little bit about what I mean by Sino-Tibetan astrology. So in Tibet, there's a tradition of divination, which is strongly based on Chinese sources. Tibet actually has several systems of divination. Some of them come from India. There's a kind of Central Asian tradition of dice divination. And I recommend the works of Brandon Dotson and Ai Nishida for an explanation of those. But what you see here is an illustration of the Chinese-derived tradition known as Nagasi in Tibet. It's a kind of stylized turtle, and in the middle you can see a magic square with the numbers 1 to 9, surrounded by the 8 trigrams and the 12 animals of the calendar. And another little detail you might notice is that the turtle holds 4 frogs impaled on sticks in its 4 claws. And this image, as you can see in the text at the bottom there, is from an article by Ronit Yoli Talim, where she talks about this idea of the golden turtle, which also has a kind of cosmic significance. It's kind of also the sort of basis and source of the world itself in this astrological tradition. So this tradition, Nagasi, is very significant in Tibet, but its kind of sources in Chinese tradition are a little bit obscure, which is why I was very interested some years ago, in 2008, when, as part of the International Dunhuang project, we were digitizing scrolls, and when one particular scroll was unrolled, we discovered it was covered with astrological diagrams and Tibetan text on the back. So here you can see 2 very long, thin images which show you the complete scroll. You can see at the top the Chinese side of the scroll with Chinese text, and at the bottom the Tibetan side. And don't worry, I'll be zooming in a great deal on these in the slides to come. And you can see in the text here the very basic description by Lionel Giles, the cataloger of this material. Fairly good manuscript, stiff, dark, yellow paper on a roller, 25.5 centimeters by 411 centimeters. The number itself, OR8210S6878, and it's part of the British Library collection. And that number tells you, the first part of it, 8210, that it was part of Aurel Stein's collections from the Dunhuang cave. The second part, S for scroll, not actually for Stein, as Melody Doomy pointed out in her talk a couple of weeks ago. And 6878 means it's the 6,878th item in that sequence. And I do recommend you have a look at Melody's talk on YouTube if you want to know a bit more about the background and the provenance of these scrolls in this collection. So, as I mentioned, this was the kind of Tibetan side of the scroll was not noticed until 2008, and I wrote a blog post about it then called The Golden Turtle on my blog earlytibet.com. No longer active, but still up there if you want to have a look. And a few years later, Dieter Shu, who is a real expert on the Tibetan systems of Chinese divination, confirmed that this is the oldest surviving evidence for the practice of this divination tradition in the Tibetan cultural area, or in the kind of Tibetan language and culture. So it really is a unique object that gives us an insight into the very beginnings of this tradition of Sino-Tibetan divination. So just to zoom in a bit, as I promised, this is the end of the scroll, and you can see the original roller or stave here. And you can see from the very end that the text is the Great Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, the Maha Prajna Paramita Sutra. And the very beginning of the side of the scroll, you can see it's actually a lot worse condition, quite damaged and quite dark in color. And at the top, you can see a little inscription by Stein himself, which says Chien 0204. What does this mean? So this is actually a register number used by Stein when he went back to Dunhuang on his third expedition. So most of his material was acquired in the second expedition. This was the third expedition where he returned and he again met with the Abbot Wang Yuanlu, who showed him some scrolls that he had kept. And Stein wrote that he thought that these scrolls had probably been already showed to Paul Pelliot, which would have been in 1908, but these had been left by Pelliot, who, as Pelliot had said in his own writings, went through all of the scrolls, but only chose those that he thought were particularly interesting. So Stein considered that these were the ones that that Pelliot had left behind, basically 570 scrolls, which Stein then purchased from Wong and sent to the British Museum. Stein didn't actually catalogue these or write about them in his work. He left them to Lionel Giles, the cataloguer, who then published a catalogue in the 1930s. So if we turn the scroll over, we do wonder whether Pelliot actually unrolled this all the way, because Pelliot was actually quite keen on collecting non-Chinese material, and I imagine if he'd seen this, he would have been quite interested in this for himself. But in the end, it came into the hands of Aurel Stein. So, what is on the Tibetan side? 12 astrological charts, and these represent 3 different divination practices. One for divining good days for traveling, one for divining good matches between a man and a woman for marriage, and the last one for finding things or possibly people which are lost or possibly have run away. And just before I get into the divination practices themselves, an interesting thing about the structure of the scroll is that the Tibetan text doesn't actually start until quite a long way down the scroll. And now we often assume that with scrolls like this, the Chinese sutra is the sort of the recto, or the front of the scroll, and the Tibetan text has been written on the back. But it's a little bit strange that the Tibetan text then only starts partway down the scroll. And if we look a little closer, also we can see this is the other side of that divide, where the Tibetan text starts on this light yellow paper, and all the blank part on the other side is this darker paper with very clear laid lines. So I do wonder if actually the Tibetan text came first, and then an extra part was attached to the top of the scroll to hold all of the Chinese text. It's just a small point from a codicological point of view, but it would affect how we see the dating of this Tibetan text. If it was added after the Chinese, then it could be quite late, 10th century, late 10th century even. But if it was before the Chinese text and the scrolls had become very braided and damaged after the Chinese text was added, then that would push the Tibetan age of the Tibetan part back. And purely from kind of paleographical point of view, looking at the handwriting of the Tibetan, it could be earlier than the bulk of our Tibetan material, which is 10th century. This could be as early as maybe the second half of the 9th century. So let's have a look at the divination practices. As I said, the first part is about good days to travel. And the way this is worked out is by looking on which day you're going to travel out of the 30 days of the lunar month, and comparing that to which part of the astrological mansions correspond to that. And there are 8. So as you can see, this circle is divided into 8 parts, and there's an inner part and an outer part. And the inner part holds all of the names of the astrological mansions that are part of this practice, only 8. And the outer part is the actual numbers of the days, and that I've transcribed here in English. So you have the door of heaven, the junction of heaven, the gaining heaven, the appearing heaven, the palace of heaven, the obscured heaven, the wealth of heaven, and the thief of heaven, and they correspond to the days you can see there. So you actually don't need to know a great deal about astrology to make this divination. You just need to match the day of the month with the heaven, and then you read below. And I've translated the Tibetan text that appears below the diagram here. So what it says is, as you can see, if it falls on the day of the door of heaven, so if, just to flip back a moment, that first one there, the first 9th, 10th, 17th, and 25th days, the result is, if you go on a long journey, it will be good, auspicious. So I put in bold the words at the end because there's always a kind of just a very brief summary of whether it's a good or bad result at the end of the reading. So again, the next one, wherever you go, you'll incur a loss, very bad. It also sort of reminds me of the tweets of a certain person that we don't see anymore. Wherever you go, you'll meet with partners, and everything you do together will result in financial gain and accomplishment. Very good. The next one, you'll encounter feasting and meat and beer. Good. The next one is, wherever you go, you'll meet with partners, and they'll bring great profit. Very good. Then wherever you go, there'll be financial loss and loss of property, resulting in ruin. Very bad. And then wherever you go, you'll meet with partners, and everything you do together will result in financial gain and accomplishment. Very good. And you may notice that actually repeats the third result. So they're not completely unique, the results here. And finally, the day of the thief of heaven means that wherever you go, you'll be attacked by thieves, which is obviously very bad. So the divination practice is actually quite simple. As you can see, it could be done as a service from an expert to a querent, but you could actually do it yourself, really, if you, as long as you were literate and could read the charts. The second chart in this practice is pretty similar to the first one. As you can see, the kind of setup is the same, except the 8 parts of the sky are now done by animals. So we have little red bird, the tiger's head, the tiger's armpit, the tiger's foot, the blue dragon, the dragon's head, the dragon's armpit, and the dragon's foot. And these are animals, again, from the Chinese system of astrology, which are associated with the different quarters of the sky. And again, you see the days are kind of lined up with the different animals, the different parts of the sky. And the results, I won't read through all of these again, but you can see the format is much the same. Interestingly, this second one results in slightly worse readings. So you have more bad ones and you have mediocre readings. So for example, if it falls on the day of the tiger's armpit, wherever you go, it will be mediocre. Well, it's a familiar experience. The other ones, as you can see, are pretty similar to what we saw before. So it's interesting to notice here that the interest here is very much in financial gain or loss. So it seems that the readings are intended for merchants, for people intending to buy or sell, to travel for a profit, and that's very much what the readings address. So we can certainly say that there's no particular Buddhist or religious component to the actual readings as we see them so far. So the next several diagrams move on to a different topic, which is about matching men and women by their birth years, something that I think is very familiar to most of us from the tradition of Chinese astrology right down to the present day. It's still very popular. And this the scroll gives us several different ways of matching up men and women by their birth year. So this is the first one, which is maybe the simplest, where you just read from top to bottom. So from this reading, we have rat with rat, that's jiwa in Tibetan, pig and pig, that's puk in Tibetan, the dog and the hare, ki and yobu, the bird and the dragon, ji and truk, monkey and the snake, treyu and trul, and the sheep and the horse, muk and ta. So these are, according to the text below, if the man and the woman are matched in this way, then they'll have high status without having to seek it. The next marriage diagram is this one, which is quite different. And from this point, you'll see in some cases I have had some difficulty in exactly working out how the animals are meant to be matched. There's a bit of text in the middle here that says you join up the birth years with the internally linked one, which seems to me that the ones in between the short lines are linked and the ones between the long lines are not, which gives us rat and ox, tiger and hare, dragon and snake, horse and sheep, monkey and bird, and dog and pig, which are generally considered good in the Chinese tradition as well. And if the man and the woman are matched in this way, then they'll benefit each other. If the rat or the ox are matched with the dog instead, then there will be no children, but they'll still benefit each other. That's what the Tibetan text tells us. So on to another one about matching animals, and here there's only 4. And now it becomes a bit more tricky. So this is called the 4 connections in Tibetan. That writing in the middle, that's what it says. And I'm assuming it's the 4 corners, which gives us sheep and monkey at the top left corner, and then dog and pig, ox and tiger and snake and dragon in the corners. I mean, it's possible that they could be linked along the lines, in which case you'd have, for example, dragon and ox, and tiger and dog, but those don't give us such good combinations. So I'm guessing this is the ones closest to each other at the corners that are meant to be matched. And here it says this is about children. So if they're matched in this way, there'll be 5 male children and 2 female children. So from a sort of patriarchal point of view, that's considered to be a good thing. 5 male children and 2 female children. Here we have another very similar one. This is called the 4 sides. And again, if we assume that's written the same way with the animals at the corners, we have snake and dragon, tiger and ox, pig and dog, and monkey and sheep. And it says if the man and the woman are matched in this way, they'll have wealth and status. And another. So you can see actually the majority of the diagrams on the scroll are about this particular system of matching the male and female by their birth years. This one is called the 4 connections in Tibetan, and I'm assuming that the ones inside the subcircles here are connected, which gives us ox and pig, dog and monkey, sheep and snake, and dragon and tiger. And the result is, if they're matched in this way, great valor. And likewise, we have a similar diagram with more subcircles, which gives us ox and rat, pig and dog, bird and monkey, horse and sheep, snake and dragon and rabbit and tiger, which results in long life, wealth, and status. So you can also see that the results here are quite similar. It's about children, wealth, social status, and here long life as well. Again, no sort of obvious Buddhist or other kind of religious component to this. Now, the last of the animal matching ones I actually really have struggled with. And you can see the scribe had trouble here too, because the scribe has written some of the animals across the lines, as we saw earlier, and then scrubbed those out and started again. And as you can see, there's one section here which is blank in the middle, and there's one next to it which has two animals. So how do we interpret this? The way that I've done it here is to assume that all of the neighboring sections are good connections, except for the snake and the horse, which are sharing the same square, which don't seem to go well together. So that results in the following matches. As you can see here, I won't read them all out, but I must say I'm not entirely happy about this interpretation. So there may well be other better ways of reading this one, but unfortunately there's no instructions coming with it. But anyway, the results of the match are wealth and status. So still on the same theme of marriage, I've written love and marriage. Maybe it sounds a little bit more romantic, but really it's just about marriage and children. But here we've got, instead of the animals, the elements, and the in Chinese astrology and in Sino-Tibetan astrology, you have elements for the years, and they alternate also between male and female. So as well as having an animal, you'll have an element, and that element will be male or female. So here they simply pair up, and I am assuming, and it works with what is considered kind of harmonious in Chinese astrology, that the ones next to each other are good. So in which case male fire goes well with female fire and wood, female fire goes well with male fire and earth, and so on and so on, around the circle. And that, I have a quote from Tibetan astrological manual, later one, that says, "The son of wood is fire, the son of fire is earth, the son of earth is metal, the son of metal is water, and the son of water is wood," which works with this, if we read this the way I'm thinking, with ones that are next to each other. Equally, the enemy of wood is metal, the enemy of metal is fire, the enemy of fire is water, the enemy of water is earth, and the enemy of earth is wood. So again, those particular combinations are avoided by reading this in this way. And the result of this is just that virtue and benefit will come out of this match. So finally, one more in this sequence, and this is going back to the animals, but this is the animals that should not be joining together, or rather the people from these years should not be joining. And we read these by looking at the ones that are directly across from each other this time, rather than next to each other. So if you can see, it's not entirely clearly, but if you draw a straight line across the center of this diagram from one animal to the one opposite it, then you get rat versus horse, ox versus sheep, tiger versus monkey, hare versus bird, dragon versus dog, and snake versus pig. And these should never be joined according to this this system. And I think this matches fairly well with the later Sino-Tibetan tradition, and slightly different but similar to the Chinese tradition as well. And in fact, I found a diagram. I didn't find it, I knew it was there on the IDP website, Chinese astrological education resource. And this gives us, from the later tradition, a very similar diagram showing what are harmonious and what are not, and the ones, similarly, the ones that are directly opposite each other are the matches that are not harmonious. So a lot of correspondence to what we see in the later tradition here in the Dunhuang manuscript. So the last thing on the scroll, one of the most mysterious and interesting, is labeled the golden turtle, and it's a divination for finding things that have been lost, and with the implication actually in the text that also this would be things that have run away, whether that would be animals or even escaped servants or enslaved people. So this is, according to the text, a turtle. And it's odd because, as you can clearly see, it doesn't have a shell. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's first of all look at how you actually do this divination practice. So here below the text, there's a fairly descriptive bit of instruction in Tibetan, much more so actually than we see on the diagrams that I looked at earlier about the matching the men and the women. So as I've translated here, it says what you need to do is you count from the first lunar day of the month on which the loss happened to the date of the loss. So basically a rather complicated way of saying if it happened on the 17th day of the month, then the number is 17. Match this with a point on the golden turtle and mark it. If the loss happened within this 30-day month, start from the head and count to the right. If it happened beyond this 30-day month, so let's say it happened last month, but now it's the third day of the next month, then you count to 3, but you go in the other direction. So you start from the tail and you count to the left. And you write whether the result is good or bad at the tail of the turtle. So basically, it's again something that can be done without any great specialist knowledge. You just take the day of the month and you count either clockwise or anti-clockwise around, and then you land on a particular part of the turtle. And these are labeled, as you can see, starting with the head and then the nose. Actually, the nose is labeled on the right and left, as are the other parts of the turtle, apart from the head and the tail. So we have the nose, the leg, the armpit, actually, to be fair, it goes nose and then arm. The top leg is called the arm, and then the armpit, and then the leg, and then the tail. And there is also another little bit of Tibetan, you can see sort of just above the tail, that says dri, which means draw. So that's like an instruction to draw the turtle. And then the results are given below. There are 6, so I've got 2 slides, I'll just read through these. So if it was lost on the day of the head, so if your counting ends up on the head, then it will be found in the vicinity of a laundry washer. If it was lost on the day of the ears, then even if you come across it while searching, it won't be beneficial to get your hands on it. So that's the worst reading, actually. Even if you find it, it won't be of benefit to you. If it was lost on the day of the arms, you'll find that if you look for it on a high mountain, in a ravine, or in the middle of a graveyard. Possibly not a very useful result, that one. If it was lost on the day of the armpits, you'll find it if you look for it at the goldsmiths, at the watermill, or in the town centre. If it was lost on the day of the feet, you'll find it if you look near an aristocrat, a minister, or an official gathering. And finally, if it was lost on the day of the tail, you'll find it if you look in the direction of your girlfriend. Yes, I do believe that's what it says. So again, a very kind of worldly series of results. Nothing particularly religious, certainly nothing Buddhist or kind of karmic about this. It's very much it gives us a kind of scene of towns and or villages and surrounding mountains, laundry washers, ministers, and girlfriends. So what about this thing that is called a golden turtle? Well, the turtle that I showed at the beginning is also known in Tibet as the golden turtle, but as you can see, it looks rather different. So can we say that our Dunhuang, the turtle or the creature depicted on the Dunhuang scroll, is a kind of is related to this one later in the Tibetan tradition? Is it an ancestor of this golden turtle? So another thing interesting to compare is this amulet. This is from Tadeusz Skorupski's book Tibetan Amulets. And again, similar to the later golden turtle, you see a very round shell depicted with a divination diagram on it. But some of the design of the actual creature, the turtle itself, is quite similar. You can see a kind of scaly tail, a clawed fingers and legs, and even the sort of bulbous nose and eyes are a bit similar. You'll notice the legs are facing up rather than down, and most kind of significant of all, the actual creature is, we're looking at it from a different direction. So in the Tibetan scroll, we're looking at it from above, and in the later Tibetan ones, we're seeing it from below. So we see its mouth, whereas we see the top of its head in the Dunhuang scroll. But I think there's some resemblance here. Another interesting turtle that I came across in a Mongolian manuscript more recently is this one. Again, different, but certainly with some similarities. We're looking at it again from the underneath, so we see its mouth, but the little clawed hands and bulbous nose are the same. And interestingly, in this case, there's no obvious shell. There isn't that kind of stylized circular shell. So this is another example that might give us more of a link back to our Dunhuang turtle. This, by the way, is also a divination manuscript. This particular page is about calculating days of the month. So I want to, at the end of this, kind of, now we've looked through the scroll, just reflect on a few questions about why it was made and what it was used for. And I've got on this slide the cover of my book, Buddhist Magic, because as I said, I came across this scroll in 2008 and wrote a bit about it then, and then left it and didn't really think about it since then. But in the intervening years, I spent quite a lot of time looking at Buddhist magical texts to do with divination and other kinds of magical practice, also related to medicine and healing. And those texts are, unlike the one that we've been looking at, are clearly Buddhist. They often derive from Buddhist Dharani, Sutra, or Tantra sources. They often involve deities, and they often have some kind of Buddhist, overarching Buddhist message. So there's a difference from this divination scroll that we've been looking at, which has no real Buddhist content. So one of the questions that I've asked about the magical texts in Buddhism is who was using them, especially if we look at the earlier material where we have the manuscripts, but we don't really have the kind of social context. So, for example, in this book, Buddhist Magic, I translated a book of spells from Dunhuang with a strong Buddhist content, but very little clues there about who was using it. Questions so then arising from that are who wrote it, how did they use it, were they going out and offering this divination and healing and other kinds of magic as a service to the community? Were they getting payment for it in one form or another? Were they monks, or were they not monks? Were they Buddhist practitioners in some sense, but not monks? And all of these questions also apply to the scroll from Dunhuang that we've been looking at. It's really a fascinating question, because when we have the object, the scroll that has kind of survived, and we can look at the pictures and we can study it, but we've lost all of that context of the people who made and used it. So we have to look for clues as best we can. And of course, certainly there's been some great work on this, especially with the Chinese manuscripts, and I'm thinking of people like Stephen Tyser with the Ten Kings Sutra and other works, and Imre Gallenbosch, and others who've asked these questions and really kind of teased out some of those clues in in the objects themselves about how they were used. So what can we say here? I mentioned about this golden turtle that there's that little bit of text above the tail which says "dri," which means draw. So it's actually an instruction there that this should be drawn. And as I've highlighted here in the text underneath, it also says when you found that result, when you've done the counting to find which part of the turtle you get to, write whether the result is good or bad at the tail of the turtle. So that's different from what's on the scroll, because the scroll itself shows the turtle, but underneath the tail immediately is written the various results. So the kind of how you do the reading. What I think the text is telling us to do is to draw the turtle for the reading, to do the counting, to mark the part of the body where you end up, and then to write the specific result underneath the turtle. So what that would mean is that this scroll, this turtle, was not used for divination. It's an instruction. It's a manual. It's showing you how to do it, but it's not a result of divination, and it's not something that was used for a specific divination. And there's a similarity, I think, to some of the other Chinese scrolls from Dunhuang, where we see talismans like this that have been studied by Mark Kalinowski and Paul Kopp and Christine Mollier and others. So these are model talismans. These are not the actual talisman that you'd use for the practice. They show you how to draw that talisman. And I think with the Tibetan scroll that I've been looking at, it's the same. So this is not something that was created for an act of divination. It kind of shows you how to do the practice. So if that's the case, this is a manuscript, sorry, the scroll itself, rather than this one we're looking at now. The scroll is something that was used for education, really, maybe for teaching. Maybe it was copied by a student of divination. Maybe it was used by the teacher to kind of pass on the practice. Who were these people? Were these Buddhist monks? The overwhelming context of the Dunhuang cave is Buddhist. I think as a sort of default, one assumes that at least at some point these manuscripts passed through the hands of Buddhist monks. So I think it's quite possible that the divination, even though it's got no Buddhist content, was used by Buddhist monks. But we have an interesting little manuscript that tells us something about Buddhist responses to Chinese divination, also found in the Dunhuang cave. And this is a Tibetan Poti manuscript, probably dating to the 10th century, and with a Buddhist prayer with a lot of annotation around it. As you can see, the big text is the prayer itself, and the small cursive text is commentary. So one part of the prayer talks about, in the bottom right there, the Buddhist Dharma, that is the correct science. It took like Dampa, is yes, the proper science, the proper means of knowledge. And below it, you can see there's quite a bit of scrawling in cursive writing. And this is the interesting bit. So under there, the commentary says, so if the Dharma is correct science, what is the incorrect science? Took like Dakpa Mayinpa. And it says it is the emperor and so on in Chinese science, which I wonder if this refers to the emperor being associated with the pole star in Chinese astrology. And therefore this is just a general reference to the system of Chinese astrology. But the little commentary goes on to say that there's incorrect science even in Tibet, and this includes studying the portents of the days, very much what we've just been looking at, astrological divination charts, also just what we've been looking at, and Lishi, which, as Andrew West told me, could well be in Dunhuang a transliteration of the Chinese Liri astrological almanacs, something that we certainly see a lot of in the Chinese manuscripts from Dunhuang, although not as far as I know in the Tibetan ones. But these things that are frowned upon in this manuscript, in this kind of Buddhist commentary, are very much what we see in the Tibetan scroll. And therefore, there's a kind of interesting tension here that these seem to have been frowned upon, at least by some Buddhist monks in Dunhuang, but perhaps practiced by others. I think, again, from my work on Buddhist magic, I'd say it's quite common, actually, in Buddhism to see something criticized when it's actually quite commonly practiced. In fact, almost we wouldn't need to be criticized if it wasn't commonly practiced. So I think there's not a great contradiction here, but there's just the fact that the Buddhist monks, I suspect, were offering these forms of divination along with other more kind of proper Buddhist methods of divination. And some monks, some Buddhist writers felt that this was improper. But finally, to return to this tanka painting that I showed at the beginning, and to zoom out a little bit, this is the one that was discussed by Ronit Yoli Klalin. And its context is actually medical. It has around the outside of it a divination text on the auspicious days for letting blood. But if you look here, you can see very clearly we have the golden turtle, as well as some other animals and the 8 auspicious symbols of Buddhism, and above that, deities. So we have Manjushri in the middle, white Tara on one side, and on the other, a deity that is identified in the welcomes catalogue as Vajrapani, but holds the Vajra and Ganta, and might be a form of Vajrasattva. So I think what this shows us, and I think this is very well known for those who know the Sino-Tibetan tradition of astrological divination, it became fully incorporated into Buddhism in Tibet, especially by the 17th century, when the Desi Sanjay Gyatso wrote volumes about this system and kind of codified it for the later tradition. In Tibet, it really became kind of very completely accepted as part of the Tibetan tradition. So it's interesting, I think, as we've seen, to identify the very first example that we know of this Sino-Tibetan tradition from Dunhuang, and also that at that time it wasn't completely accepted. There was a concern that that what was known as the Chinese system of astrology was not Buddhist, and therefore was not accepted. But that was should we say a transitional phase to the later fully accepted form of Chinese astrology in Tibet. So that's the end, but I'm just finishing with a few web links here, just to say that the images, the manuscript images, have all come directly from the IDP website, the website of the International Dunhuang Project. Even those ones that were very zoomed into are the wonderful high-resolution images straight off the IDP database. There's also a link here to the Wellcome Library's medical tanka, which is also available for free in a very wonderful high-resolution image. My original blog post is still up there on the Early Tibet blog if you're interested. And I also strongly recommend a talk on YouTube, which is by Melody Doomy, who I mentioned gave the previous talk in this series. But she also has another talk from back in, I think, December last year, called Mapping the Sky in Ancient China, which talks about another more famous astrological manuscript from the Dunhuang cave, which is the Chinese star chart manuscript and its role in the Chinese astrological tradition. And finally, that astronomy/astrology educational resource on the IDP website is not terribly easy to find by clicking through, but if you can go straight to it on that link that I've got there if you want to have a look. It's a nice kind of simple and clear explanation of the Chinese tradition. So that is the end of my talk. I'm actually just going to, I've got one more slide which I'm just going to leave up, and I don't think anybody's going to want to scribble all this down now, but perhaps when this talk goes up on YouTube, this will be useful. People can pause their video, and this is the actual bibliographical references of some of the books that I've mentioned in this talk. So thank you, everybody. That's the end of my talk. Happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Sam. We have quite a few questions coming in. And I'd like to remind everyone, if you have any outstanding questions, you can just go to the Q&A bubble at the bottom of the screen and submit them there. We will do our best to get around to you in due turn. All right, so Sam, the first question is, thank you so much. I'm curious about the form of the diagram. Why would it be a circle whose inner part is divided into several parts? What is the special meaning of that? Also, this kind of astrology diagram is often found painted as a mural at the entrance of several dzongs in Bhutan. Is there a special meaning of presenting an astrological diagram at the entrance?
Yes,
that's a lot.
So, yeah. So the form of the diagrams. So this is something that I haven't seen anything exactly the same as what we see in the scroll. The circle, I think, is a sort of nod towards the idea of a map of the sky and mapping out the kind of mansions of the heavens, but it doesn't really work like that. As I said, it really can just be used by reading the days, numbers of the days in the outer part of the circle with the astrological mansion mentioned in the inner part of the circle. So I think if the circle itself has a meaning, it's to do with that kind of cosmological significance, and of course it does match to that much more worked out circle that's in the golden turtle. It's a later tradition that I showed in this talk. And then that's fascinating that it's at the entrance of dzongs in Bhutan. I wasn't aware of that. It seems like it might have a similar function to the wheel of life, which is also found in the entrance to monasteries held by Yama, kind of showing the whole of kind of the cycle of rebirth and death. I think if there's a similarity here, it's that these are both kind of cosmological ideas. So the turtle is the kind of cosmological symbol, as is Yama holding the wheel of death. That's just a guess.
Oh, that makes good sense. Thank you, Sam. We have a question. What is the origin of the Buddhist magic you discussed? What foreign influences, if any, do you see in your research?
Right. Well, that's also lots of foreign influences. So apart from the Chinese, I just point to one thing, which is in the Tibetan divination manual that I translated in the book, there's a divination method called Prasana, and this is where a mirror is used, and a young person, a prepubescent child, is instructed to gaze into the mirror and then tell the person doing the ritual what they see. And then from that, the visions that they see in the mirror, the divination is then kind of interpreted and the results given. And this is something that we see, the kind of bones of this tradition, the mirror or other reflective object, the person performing the ritual, and the child who does the seeing and then is questioned. We see in early Iran, in Jewish magic, all the way through to, there's an account of this in England in the 11th century, and in India. So that I suggested in the book maybe came from the kind of central sort of Babylonian area, and then was transmitted beyond into all of these different places. But there's something specifically really that you see in magical texts that they do tend to come from all over the place, and I think this is because it's a very pragmatic area that people will use whatever works. So yes, lots of different influences.
Thank you, Sam. We had a comment here. Someone asked if the circle on the turtle was related to the circle of life held by Yama. So someone else had a similar idea to refer to the last question. So thank you. We have a number of turtle questions. I'm going to group them together. First is, why choose a turtle instead of some other animal? Did turtles live in such a high and cold region? And also a follow-up question was, did turtles exist in Tibet and Mongolia in the 10th century or thereabouts?
So I think the turtle itself, so the reason for the turtle I read in the kind of Chinese tradition comes from the use of the shell for divination, prediction, not necessarily astrological, but like the use of bones and other material in very early times. So that the shell itself was kind of associated with divination, and then by association the turtle too. So I think the whole tradition then comes to Tibet from China. So the existence of actual turtles in the Himalayas, or tortoises, and that's another point actually. The Tibetan word doesn't distinguish between the turtle or tortoise, between land or sea creatures, but it's not necessary for these actual, for people to have kind of encountered a turtle or a tortoise, because the tradition was coming from China anyway. And certainly, as you see from the depictions, that they're not particularly kind of realistic. They have their charm, but they're definitely yeah, not very realistic turtles.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer. I mean, we see examples of a similar phenomenon in the Dunhuang caves. You have lions represented, and there are no lions in the Gobi Desert. There are, animals that resemble it, but not an African lion.
No. Yeah, the tradition of all the different animal depictions in the Dunhuang paintings and the manuscripts is fascinating. Some of them, I think, do seem to be sometimes to be drawn from observation, and others definitely not.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Well, we have more questions coming in. To what extent does the use of the zodiac houses reveal Tibetan skill at astronomy?
So as I mentioned, in this tradition, on the scroll, you wouldn't need skill in astronomy to do the divination. Would there have been people with that skill? Again, as I said, we don't know the social context, so it's hard to say. Certainly, this scroll is not like that one that in Chinese, the star chart that Melody has spoken about, and that also the top reference in the slides here is by Susan Whitfield and collaborators on that. That's a much more developed and complicated astronomical and astrological system. So I think the main thing to say is that you could use this divination scroll, the Tibetan one, without particular knowledge of the stars or astrology.
Excellent, thank you. Another remark on cross-cultural influences. The 12 animals calendar, zodiac calendar, was used by Chinese, Tibetans, and the Turks. What is the region of the calendar, in your opinion? How was it developed? I think they're wondering, where did it originate? What is the history of this type of calendar?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, I think it's generally thought to be the 12 animals is Chinese, but I mean, it's certainly an interesting thing about Dunhuang, I think, is that it was at least for dating, just for kind of administration, before the Tibetan occupation, the system of emperor's reign dates was used, and then under the Tibetan administration, the animal years were used instead. and I think after then the return to allegiance army kicked out the Tibetan presence from Dunhuang. It didn't necessarily go back to the rain date. So there's an interesting thing about administration in Tibet, in the Tibetan system, that they use the 12 animals for kind of official documents in a way that hadn't been done with the Chinese ones.
All right, thank you, Sam. We have a question. What is the Tibetan name for the first lunar month?
So these are not given in the manuscripts, and I do have a record of that written down, but not here. So I think I'll have to. I can definitely check that and come back on that later.
Okay, take a ring check on that one. We have a remark about the painting you showed. So from Yannick, remark, traditionally the three deities on the top of the Tibetan astrological painting are the group known as, and I'm going to butcher this, I apologize in advance, I do not speak Tibetan, Rigs Gum Mongpo. The deity on the left-hand side of your painting is most likely Avalokiteshvara, given the presence of a gazelle skin on his shoulder. Accordingly, he holds a pink lotus, while White Tara would be holding a blue lotus. I don't have an explanation for the Vajrapani Vajradhara depiction.
That's a very good point, actually. So yes, the Riksum Gompo is a very common set, and there are some iconographical uncertainties with that blue figure. But actually, the white one with the lotus, yeah, I think that could be Avalokiteshvara. So yes, it's a good point.
Thank you, Yannick. How relevant are these ancient divination methods today? Are they still practiced?
So are they still practiced? Yes. So I think some are and some aren't. But I mean, the ones that are very clearly still practiced and indeed kind of really filtered into popular culture are the relationship ones. So you can look on many websites to make your own calculation about the the birth year and the one of your partner and see how you match up. So that is definitely still part of it. The finding of lost things, I don't know. I mean, I think it's quite likely that's still around in some form. And the days for traveling, actually something similar is found on that Mongolian manuscript that I showed, which is a more recent thing. So that definitely is still part of a continuous tradition.
Excellent, thank you, Sam. Why did, in the Tibetan, I guess in the depiction, did the Tibetans remove the shell of the turtle? Why did they take the shell of the turtle off?
Yeah, well, so let me just be clear, I don't think anybody actually took a turtle's shell off, at least I hope not. But I was also told it's not possible to do that because it's very much an integral part of their body. So, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's interesting that the depiction of the turtle with a very circular shell, that the shell has almost become a kind of diagram itself. It's sort of lost its connection to the kind of naturalistic shell of the turtle, where so you could almost remove that and just show the turtle. I have a feeling that that they did mean to depict a turtle, but in order to show the parts of the body, they just removed pictorially, not in fact, removed the shell, so you could see the nose, the legs, the tail, and so on. But it's a good question. I mean, there's another discussion, and you can see the reference here on the screen by Duncan Poupard about is it a frog? That's another question. Maybe it's a frog. And in the Nashi tradition, there's a kind of mythical creature with confusion about whether it's a turtle or a frog or something else again. So so this is also also been discussed by other people.
So it could be a cutaway, or it could be another animal entirely.
Right.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Sam. This is interesting. Does Tibet have concepts of elements like fire, water, earth, air, etc.? Like I think the 5 elements that you had meant. Oh no, this would be the 4. I think they mean the 4 elements that you would see more in a Greek tradition.
Yeah. So Tibet, at least a little later, classically takes the 5 elements, the 5 Buddhist elements, and in this Chinese tradition, though, we have also we have metal as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a sort of global tradition going from Greece to India to China, with those variations in 4 or 5, or whether we have wood or metal, and in Tibet, that sort of classic 5 elements of Buddhism was the one that kind of settled down in the end.
Right. From the Dunhuang caves, or in the Dunhuang caves, are there any mentions of Bonpo divination as well?
Yes. So I mentioned, and I think unfortunately I don't have the references here, but works especially by Brandon Dotson and Ai Nishida as well on the practice of dice divination, or mo in Tibetan. And this was certainly more, I mean, at least if we just count the number of manuscripts, there are quite a few more dice divination manuscripts than this single Sino-Tibetan astrological scroll. So that might have been a more popular method. And that is one that we can link to the Bonpo tradition, because it does include deities, non-Buddhist deities, from all kinds of influence, including in one that the Tibetologist Geisha Urai pointed out a long time ago, where Jesus, the Messiah, is also mentioned as one of the deities that is kind of figures in the divination. So there's a lot of, yes, other divination practices in the manuscripts, but it's dice divination in particular that seems to come from an earlier Central Asian Tibetan tradition, not specifically from India or from China, and that is linked to that Bonpo tradition in later Tibetan. It has the same name, Mo, which is the system of dice divination.
Oh, okay. Thank you. In reference to the earlier question about magic and elements from different cultures that you found in your research into magic as practiced at Dunhuang, you mentioned Jewish and Babylonian influences. So what elements in particular did you find that pointed to these particular cultures?
Yes, I mean, this was specifically that Prasana mirror divination. And as I mentioned, that's found in the Jewish tradition. Actually, a colleague, Ayob Derillo at the British Library, has also pointed out it's in the Ethiopian tradition. So it's really widespread. And in the sort of early Iranian tradition. So just as a very kind of speculative theory, I thought that the fact that the kind of earliest examples of this come from that Mesopotamian area might indicate that it's an early method from the kind of Babylonian culture that was then, from that point, like other aspects of early Babylonian culture, transmitted to India, as well as to into the Jewish magical systems, into Africa, Europe, and China as well. So it's a speculation, but it's one very fascinating example of a magical practice that becomes so widespread that we really, at the moment, can only speculate about where it started. But I think a fantastic cross-disciplinary research project would be a wonderful thing to look into that.
Very much so. Oh, well, Sam, I want to thank you so much. We have come to the end of our questions, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time and care to answer each of them. and to our audience for submitting them. I'd also like to thank you for your lecture about the types of magic deployed at Dunhuang, and in particular, the divinatory practices and astrological practices that were used there as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia, and yes, thanks everybody who asked questions. All very interesting, and in some cases, some very good suggestions that I hadn't thought of. So
that's always the best. You have
Mm.
new avenues to explore. You know. As a note, everyone, our next lecture in the Religions of the Silk Road series will be on June 10th, so 2 weeks from today, but at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I want to emphasize that. We're jumping continents next time, and so our next speaker is on a different continent, so it will be a little bit later, 8 p.m. Eastern time for the US. Our speaker will be Nikki Morita, who is the project manager of the Georgetown IDP, or International Dunhuang Project. She will be speaking on an overview of the Silk Road pieces from Northwestern China in North American collections. Again, that will be on Thursday, June 10th, 2 weeks from today, but at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Further information is forthcoming. So to our viewers, sincere thanks again for joining us today. We greatly appreciate you and your encouragement and support. Once more, I'd like to thank Sam for his excellent illuminating lecture this afternoon. And I'd like to wish you all a lovely afternoon. Until next time.